Hey, what's up? This is Chris Plush from CG Masters, and in this tutorial we're going to finish up our knife game asset by texturing it in Substance Painter. This is beginner friendly for anyone new to Substance Painter. I highly recommend checking this program out, even if only for the free 30-day trial you can use to do this tutorial and finish up the knife. Now, if you didn't follow along with this series and you're just watching this to learn Substance Painter, you can download the knife files that you'll need for this tutorial in the link in the description. Then you can just skip ahead to when I start using Substance. So to get things started, I'm going to show you how to bake normal maps in Substance Painter. Now, this is actually necessary for you to do as well. The normal map that we used or that we baked in Blender gave me some issues with the curvature map that gets baked in Substance. I'm not really sure what the technical issues are there, but the normal map baked in Substance Painter actually comes out a bit higher quality, and the baker is actually a lot easier to use than in Blender, so it's really useful to know this stuff. Now, I've got my final low poly knife file opened up here, and what we're going to do is separate each of these into their own objects in order to have them bake individually instead of as one group object. So I'm going to tab into edit mode for that. I'll press the P key and I'll separate everything by loose parts. That gives us our three individual objects back. Now I'll start with the blade up here. I'll press the N key for the right side toolbar. And in order to have this match up with the high poly blade object to bake the normals for, what we're going to do is rename these with suffixes _low and _high. So I'll rename this in the right side toolbar to blade _low. I'll do the same thing for the handguard. I'll rename this to handguard _low, and also for the handle _low. And then hop on over to the first layer by pressing 1 on the number row, and just rename these the same exact way, but this will be blade _high, and this is handguard _high, and then handle _high. And now we can export these. So let me select just the three low poly objects. I'll go to File, Export, FBX, and make sure selected objects is enabled down there. And we will save this to the desktop. I'll save this as knife _low.fbx and press enter. And we'll do the same thing for the high. So let's go back to the first layer, select just all of the high poly objects, go to File, Export, FBX, and again, make sure selected objects is enabled, and we'll rename this to knife _high. So now we have both files that we need to pull these into Substance Painter and get some nice normal maps baked. Now over in Substance Painter, let's start a new project. So I'll go to File, click on New, and up top we can change our template here. There's other templates like Unreal Engine, but I'm going to set mine to Unity 5. And I'll keep the other settings the same, including the document resolution of 2048. You can look at this as more of a working resolution because this can be changed at any time without any loss, like it says next to it. Substance Painter basically just recalculates the textures we made. So let's select our mesh up here now. So find knife _low and load that in, and then click on OK. Now we need to bake different maps for this. So let's go over to our texture set settings tab over here, and we'll scroll down and click on Bake Mesh Maps. Now from this dialog, we can bake all these different maps over here, including our normal map and ambient occlusion and curvature. I'm going to bake all of these because some of these are used for different things in different materials that we might end up using. So up top, I'll keep the resolution the same, and let's go down to the high definition meshes dialog right here, and I'll click on that button and we'll load in our high poly mesh that we exported. So I'll scroll down and load in knife _high. So now it's going to use that as the high poly mesh to bake the normal map. And you can see down here that these are the suffixes that are going to be used, and that's how we named our objects, so we're good to go. Now we just need to change how it matches up. So let me click on that field there, and I'll change that to by mesh name. That way it's going to basically explode bake. It'll take our entire knife object and separate it individually by the different meshes within the object. And it'll match those meshes up with the same meshes on the high poly object, and it'll bake them all separately and put them all into one map. Now let's enable anti-aliasing to smooth out the lines. Obviously the higher you go, the slower the bake is going to be, but the quality is definitely going to be better. I'm going to go with 4. Now let's go over to the ID tab. Now, color ID is a specific color assigned to parts of a mesh that identify it, and that's useful for things like masking. So just in case we end up using this, let's color our mesh by the different mesh names we have. So let's go up to color source, and we'll change this to mesh ID. That'll give each part of our knife a different color. Now let's go over to the curvature tab right there. Now the curvature map assigns grayscale values to sharp edges and crevices on your mesh, and that's going to be useful for things like creating wear around the edges or maybe some dirt in the crevices. So let's first turn off enable seams. If we don't do that, then it's going to draw some black edges around where we put seams on our knife to UV unwrap it. All right, everything else looks good. I think we're done here, so let's click on Bake Material Mesh Maps. So all of the mesh maps have been baked now, and you can see our normal map has been applied to the knife, and it looks fantastic. Now let's rotate the scene and check out the knife. If you're completely new to Substance Painter, the way you navigate the 3D view is by holding the Alt key. Then you can left click and drag to rotate the scene, hold Alt and right click to zoom in and out. You can also use the scroll wheel, and then hold Alt and middle click and drag to pan it. And in order to get perfect alignment views, you can hold Alt and Shift and left click and drag, and it'll snap to the closest views. And you can also switch orthographic and perspective off and on by using F5 or F6 or this menu right here. So let's check out our mesh maps real quick. Let me press the F1 hotkey to split the window and get our textures on the right side. And we can scroll through our textures using this menu here. So we've got our normal map, which looks great. And then there's the ID, and you can see each specific color assigned to the different parts. And our curvature map, this is where we have the information for the sharp edges and the crevices. And yeah, so everything looks like it came out pretty good. Let me press F2 to go back to just this screen. And I'll switch our menu back to material up here. And now we can start texturing. So to start texturing this, what we're going to do is set up masks that isolate each different area that has a different texture so we can texture things separately. So let's head over to the Layers tab here, and I'll delete the default paint layer. We're going to add a fill layer that just fills the whole layer. So I'll click on this button here to add that in. And we have the properties for the fill layer down here. Let me click on that, drag it up so we have a little more room to work with. I'll scroll down, and under base color here, we'll just change this to a brown. Just for right now, just to tell us what this layer is going to be. And that looks fine. And let me create a new folder. So I'll click on this folder, or I'll click on that icon to create a new folder. And I'll rename this to Handle. And I'll click on that, I'll drag it into the Handle folder. Now let's click on the Handle folder. We're going to add a mask to this to mask all the contents of the folder. So to add a mask, let's go up to the mask menu here and add in a black mask. So it'll make everything black to start off with, which means everything's transparent. Now we just need to color in the sections that we want to be visible. So let me go over to our polygon fill tool over here. And right now I could click on any of these triangles and it'll fill it with white, and that will be visible. But I want to fill in the entire handle mesh. So let me go up to this option called Mesh Fill. I'll click on that, then simply left click on the handle mesh. It'll fill it all in with white, so the entire handle is now visible. And we are actually done with this layer for now. We're done with this mask. And we'll do a similar process for each of the other objects. So let me click on that icon to collapse it, and let's start on the handguard. So we'll do pretty much the same thing. We'll add in a new fill layer, and that'll add it on top of the handle. And we'll go down to the base color and change this to black. And now let's add in a new folder above that. So I'll click that icon, and we'll rename this to Handguard and Pommel, because we'll be including the bottom of the handle in this as well. And let's drag that layer up into that folder. Click on the folder to select it, and we'll add a black mask to it. So go to the mask menu and add in a black mask. Now I'll zoom into the handguard and make sure your polygon fill tool is enabled as well as mesh fill, and then just click on the handguard there. Now we're actually going to have to hand paint this separation down here. So to make our lives a little bit easier, let's enable symmetry. So let's go up to this menu, click on that button to enable symmetry, and the red plane there is which axis it's mirroring on. And I guess that's fine. We'll just paint it on the side. Let me get a nice flat view of this. So I'm going to go up to the menu here, switch over to orthographic. Then I'll hold Alt and Shift, left click and drag until the view flattens out for me. Let me pan it and zoom in. Now to start things off, let's go up here and switch our tool back to polygon fill. And now we can just left click and drag over all those faces there, and it'll fill them in. And that'll get the faces on the bottom of the handle too. So now we just have to paint that little section above it. So let's switch over to the paintbrush. And right now you can see we're painting in black, but we want to paint in white. So go over to the properties panel, scroll down, and let's change the color here to white. Now let's change the hardness and the size of the brush. And you can do that by holding the control key and then right click. And if you drag up and down, it changes the hardness. So I'll make it about that hardness right there. And then if you drag left and right, it changes the size. So I'll drag that down to there. Now let me just sweep across here and paint in that seam very carefully. Now let me rotate the scene, get anything I might have missed over here. And if you paint it over the edges, what you can do is just change that color back to black. And then you can paint out anything that overlapped. All right, so there we go. So our mask is now set up for our handguard and our pommel. I'll turn off symmetry, and now we can get to work on the blade. Now let's go over here, and I'll click on that icon to collapse the folder. And let's add in a new fill layer. And we'll give this a silver color. And let's add a new folder for it. And we'll rename this to blade. And let's drag that layer into the blade folder. And we'll add a black mask to this, so I'll click on the blade folder, go to the mask menu, and add in a black mask. Let me pan the scene up. And let me enable perspective view again. I like working in that a little bit better. And with the mask enabled, let's go over to our polygon fill tool, switch it back over to mesh fill, and click on the blade. And there we go. Now our blade is going to have multiple textures. We're going to have the black paint on top of the blade, but also the steel underneath it. So let me click on the fill layer there, and I'll add a new fill layer above that. Let's rename both of these. Well, first let me recolor this one to black or a dark gray. And I'll rename this to black paint. And let's rename the one underneath that to steel. Now let's click on our black paint layer, and we're going to add a mask to this so we can get the steel showing up on the knife's edge on the left side. So let me go up to the mask menu, add in a black mask, and let's make sure we set our grid or our polygon fill tool to mesh fill. And I'll left click on that. And now what we'll do is switch back to polygon fill, and we'll click on each of these triangles on the knife's edge, and we'll color them black so that the steel shows through. First, to make things easier, let's set up symmetry again. I'll click on that, and we'll change the mirror to mirror on the Z, so that it's slicing right down the middle in that direction. All right, cool. Now let's change the color to black, and I'll just left click and drag over those two triangles there, and it should paint them for me nicely, and it should paint the other side, and it does. So I'll just do that all the way up. All right, with that all filled in, let me turn off symmetry. Let me just rotate the view, make sure everything was painted in correctly. And it looks good to me. Now let's go over to our black paint layer and click on the actual layer and not the mask. And let's change a few settings before we work on the steel first. So I'll rotate the view like this so I get a nice shine from the light. You can also rotate the light around the scene by holding Shift, right click and drag. Well, I'll keep it right about there. Let me go down here, and I think I got it set to a good color. Let me just change the roughness down and the metallic up. Let me turn metallic all the way up. I'll turn roughness down to 0.23. So it's a little bit more shiny, a little bit more glossy. And let me change the height value as well. I want the paint to lift up off the surface of the steel just a tiny, tiny bit. So I'll change this value to 0.01. And that'll be more visible later on when we actually have some wearing and chips in the paint. Now we're done with the black paint for now. So let me click on that button there to hide it, and we'll work with just the steel layer. So let me click on the steel layer, and let's assign one of these materials down here in the materials folder. Let me drag that up a little bit. And let's see, we're going to use one of the steel ones. So let's click on steel rough, and it'll automatically apply it to that layer for us. So that's a pretty good start for our base steel. Our steel's not going to be that visible through all the scratches anyway, so we don't have to go too crazy with this. We just need a little bit of texture to it and some shininess. So let me go down in the properties panel now, and I'll change the steel roughness value to 0.25, make it a little bit shinier. And let's expand the technical parameters here, and let's change the normal intensity, because I think this is a little bit too bumpy. So I'll turn this down to 0.2, and that's better. So that's going to be our base steel that we're putting the black paint on top of. Now let's go over to the black layer. I'll re-enable visibility, and now you can see the steel poking through on the side there with the little bit of texture that it's got. So that's pretty cool. And you can also see the bump detail shining or coming through as well. That's because between the layers, all of the bump and normal map detail, they're combined. We can override that if we want to, but in this case, it actually makes sense. So let's go to our black layer now and add some edge wear. So I'll click on the mask for the black layer. And I don't want to look at the polygon, so I'm going to switch over to my brush tool over there. And let's add in a generator. So with the mask selected, I'll go up to the effects menu and add in a generator. And down here in the properties menu, I'll click on that button, and we'll switch this over to metal edge wear. Now you can see it's having an effect, but kind of the opposite effect that we want. So we'll click on the invert button, and that's much better. Now the first thing we'll do is bring back the knife edge by changing the blending type for this generator to multiply. And there we go. Now there's tons of parameters down here you can play with, like how much wear that you want, how much the curvature affects it, how much ambient occlusion affects it, and things like that. You're free to play around with all these options, but I've already messed around and figured out what settings I want. So I'm going to go through and tell you what I've changed. So let's change the contrast up to 0.8. And I'll change the grunge amount to 0.4. And let's change the grunge scale to 3 so that the textures are a little bit larger. And now let's change the curvature weight down to 0.23. Just so it's not so consistently worn around those edges. That looks decent. And let's take a look at our height map. So you can see a little bit of a bump there, but it's not really that noticeable. Let me click on the actual black paint layer there. Go back down to the height value. And we'll change this to 0.02. So it bumped up a little bit more. That looks pretty good. All right, so far so good. Now I want to hand paint some damage onto this. So let's go over and click on the mask for the black paint layer. And now we can simply left click and drag and paint on this. Let me press Ctrl and Z and undo that. Let's use some cooler brushes though. So let's go over to the alphas channel. And I'll use some of these brushes right here. I'll start off with brush paint line cloudy. So I'll left click on that. And let me press Ctrl and what is it? Right click? Yeah, right click and then drag to the right to resize that. So I'm going to add some more. I'm going to add some chips along the knife's edge over here. You can see the brush kind of rotates with the surface. In order to change that, let's go over to the properties here, scroll down to alignment, and we'll change that to camera. That way it stays flat based on the view we're in. And let me resize this a little bit. And I'll just left click right on the edge right there to create some damage there. So that's what I'll do all the way up the line. I'll resize this, I'll rotate it, I'll add just some random damage along the edge there, maybe some extra damage on the surface like that. And I'll just go through and customize it. And feel free to look through the other brushes as well. Maybe you can find a nice scratch brush in there, create some extra scratches here and there. And I'll see you in a minute. All right, so I painted my chips on both sides, and this is ready to go. Now the surface is still a little bit too clean. Obviously this knife has seen its fair share of wear and tear, so we're going to need to rough up the surface a bit. So let's go over to our layers and click on the actual black paint layer. Now I'll go up to this menu and we'll add in a filter. And from the filter select here, let's scroll down and choose Matte Finish Rough. And adds an instant layer of grunge and just roughness to the surface. It's really, really cool. And now there's also a bunch of parameters you can play around with over here. I'm just simply going to turn the brush intensity down to 0.25 and call it a day. That looks perfect to me. All right, so we roughed up the surface. We gave it some chips. Now we're going to add one extra layer of grunge, and it's just going to be for some scuffs and some scratches. Let's go back over to the layers, and we'll click on this button to create a new fill layer. Let's rename this to Scuff Marks. Now let's go down to our properties down here and scroll up to the top. So here's the main material settings right here. And this is the number of channels and the types of channels that are affected by this layer. We just want to affect the roughness of the surface, just like our matte finish affected the roughness of the surface. So I'm going to disable everything except rough. So now this layer is only affecting how reflective and glossy the surface is. Now let's go back down here and click on roughness. Instead of just using a regular roughness value, we're going to load it in a grunge texture. So up in the search field, I'm going to type in grunge, scratches, dirty. And this is the grunge map I'm looking for right there. So click on that and it loads that in as our roughness. You can see that things are way too rough though. I just want to add some more faint scuff marks to the surface. So let me bring the balance. Okay, yeah, I'll change the balance down to 0.45, just a little bit lower. And the contrast up to 0.75. So that's looking pretty good, except for the fact that it's actually making some parts more glossy. I already have the glossiness I want set in the black paint layer, so I just want this to detract from that glossiness and make, scuff marks here and there. So what I'll do is go over to the channel up here on the layers tab. I'll change this to roughness, and now we can switch the blending type over here and also play with the opacity of the roughness of this layer. So let me change the blending type from normal to screen. That way it's not going to make any parts more glossy, it's just going to detract from the glossiness. And I'll turn the screen value down to, let's go with something around 30. just so those marks are a little bit more faint. Just like that. That looks pretty good. Now let's turn that layer on and off, make sure it actually adds value. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So you can play around with those settings if you want, but I think I dialed it in how I want it to be. Now we're almost finished with the blade. We just have to add those text stamps at the bottom of the knife. Is that everything I wanted to do over here? Yeah. All right, first let's go up to the layer channels up here, and we'll switch this back to base color. So now let's go up to File, and let's import some resources for that. Let's click on Add Resources, and we'll load in both Kabar Bump and USA Bump. And let's change the type of both of these files from undefined to alpha. That's actually important because that's how Substance Painter defines what these resources can be used for. And since we'll be using them as alpha channels for a paintbrush, I'm switching them both over to alpha. And I'll import the resources to my project. And then click Import. And now what we're going to do is use these as part of a paintbrush to paint that height information onto our blade. And we're going to do that on a new layer. So let's go over here. And we'll click on that icon there to add a layer. And this is just a regular paintable layer. This isn't a fill layer. And I'll rename that to Text Stamps. And let's scroll down to the bottom of our properties over here now. And right here, we only want this to affect the height channel. So let's disable all the other channels. And let's change the height to something negative so this actually engraves. So it'll be real small. I'll put it at negative 0.05 and we'll see how that works out. Now let me scroll up to the alpha here. Now, all we have to do to load one of these images into that alpha is just simply left click on it over there, and it automatically puts it there for us. And now, as you can see, it's part of our brush. And now what we'll do is straighten this view out. So let me go up to orthographic view here. Then I'll hold Alt and Shift, left click until this view flattens itself out for me. And now we can paint this on there. So let me resize this now. I'll hold Control, right click and drag until that's the right size. I think something like that looks about right. Maybe a touch bigger, just like that. And I'll center it right in this region and then left click. And there we go. Cool. Now let's swing around to the back and do the same thing with USA. So I'll hold Alt and Shift and left click and drag until we have a perfect view of the back here. And now I'll hold Shift and right click until the lighting is in the back. And now let's click on USA 1211 and we'll resize this by holding Control, right click and then drag left until this is about the right size. I think that looks good. And I'll center it right in there and then left click. So there we go. We got both of our text stamps. Now let's add some wear and tear around the edges of this height detail. So let's go over to the layers and we'll add an effect to this. So go up to the effects menu and add in a filter. And from the filters, let's choose Matte FX, Matte FX Detail Edge Wear. So left click on that, and this is going to allow us to add some edge detail and some edge wearing to things like normal maps and height maps. Right now, the input mode is set to normal, so let's switch that over to height, and you can see it's giving us some damage. Now let's go down to settings, and right now all the wear is at the bottom of these letters, so let's get that up on the rims. So let's enable invert curvature. And right now it's way too extreme, so let me turn curvature intensity down to 0.15. And let me scroll up. Now I'll also decrease the wear level to get the right look I'm going for. I just want a hint of that wear around these letters. And that looks good to me. And right now it's just basically white. It's not the steel behind the black paint because this isn't acting as a mask. So we're going to need to basically mimic the steel material behind the paint. So let's go into the material settings here and expand PBR Metallic Roughness. We'll change this to a gray, same as the actual steel material we have. And metallic set to 1. Let's turn roughness to 0.25, the same roughness we have on our steel material. And that just helps it blend in a little bit better. So we're done with the blade, and now we're just going to use the same material for the handguard and the pommel. So let me go over here. I'll click on scuff marks, hold Shift, select black paint and steel, then press Ctrl and C to copy them. Now let's go down and expand the handguard folder. Click on the fill layer in there and then press Ctrl and V and it'll paste those layers we copied above that. Now we can go down and we can delete that fill layer. We don't need that anymore. Now you can see only the steel showing up here. And that's because we have to go over to our mask right there, click on that, and our metal edge wear here is set to multiply. That's because we're using that in order to mask out the edge of the knife over there. So let's reset this back to normal, and there we go. So you can change the edge damage if you want by editing this generator there, but I think everything looks good as is. So now we can just move on to the handle. So we'll need to go into our handle folder, but let's close the other ones up first. So I'll click on blade to close that, and handguard as well, and let's expand the handle folder. Now let's go over to our shelf, scroll down and click on smart materials. This is just a collection of more advanced materials. And I'll scroll down, we'll click on rubber dry and drag that up and on top of the fill layer in the handle folder. So this will be the base rubber material we'll be working with. We're done with this layer underneath it, so I'm going to select that and press delete to get rid of it. And then let's expand the rubber dry folder. So I want to change the look of things just a little bit, and we're going to do it on this layer right here. So I'm going to click on the mask for rubber worn there. And then it has a mask generator there. I'll click on that as well. And let's change this generator. So I'll click on that option and we'll change it over to a metal edge wear generator. And you can see that changes up the look a little bit. Now we'll just edit this until we like it. Let's change the wear contrast down to 0.25. That looks a little bit better. I didn't really want it to look scratched up. Just want it to look like there's some caked dirt on there and that it's dry rubber and stuff like that. And now let's go up and click on the actual rubber worn layer. And let's change the height value and the roughness value on this. So I'll change the height value to something small, 0.05. Gives it just a tiny bit of height detail. And we'll change the roughness value down to 0.5. So things are a little bit shinier. Oops, I didn't actually change that. There we go. All right, that's not bad. Let me tab into full screen now and check things out. It's looking pretty good. Let me switch back over to perspective. And I'll hold shift and right click and drag to move the light around, see how things look. All right, that's looking pretty decent. I think the paint might be a little bit too dark. Let me tab out of full screen. I'll go up to my blade folder, click on the black paint layer, and let's just increase this a little bit. Maybe to a value of 0.01. Looks good to me. Just a little bit brighter. And we'll have to do the same thing for the handguard as well. I'll click on the black paint layer there, click on the color, and for the value over here, I'll type in 0.01. All right, cool. Now let's do one more thing. If you scroll down and zoom into the pommel here, you can see that the height detail from the rubber handle is actually poking through. That's because the pommel is not masked out on the handle layer, so all that height detail is combining. So what we'll do to fix that is just go over here, click on the handguard and pommel layer, and let's switch to the height channel for the layers. And let's change the blending type to replace. As you can see, that fixes that because now the height detail for the handguard and pommel layer is overriding that of anything underneath it. Now let's go back here and we'll switch this back to base color. And now what we're going to do is add a general dirt layer over everything. Now let's go over here and we'll collapse all of our folders and select the top one so we can add a new layer above it, and click on this button to create a new fill layer. Now let's go over to our materials and let's choose something that looks like dirt. Leather bag is surprisingly a nice looking dirt material. So I just left clicked on that and it automatically assigns itself to the fill layer. So our knife obviously now needs some kind of mask to show it where the dirt should go. So let's go over and play with the smart masks over here in the shelf. So all these smart masks are really cool. You can just left click and drag them on the layer and they'll automatically apply these really cool masks to it. So you can play around with these. I find sharp dirt to work really well, but there's other cool ones too. Like we can choose moss from above, drag and drop on there, and it'll be dirtier at the tip of the knife and get less dirty as it goes down. Let me press Control and Z. So that's pretty cool, but I'm gonna go with, where is it? Sharp dirt. So I'll left click that and drag it over to the fill layer. And now it's giving me some dirt around the crevices, like at the bottom of the blade and in the ridges in the handle. So that's exactly what I wanted. Let me drag this down now. I think we're done with that. And let's go over and select our dirt generator here. And is that the right one? Let me scroll up to the top. Yeah, here we can control the dirt level. I'm just gonna add a little bit more. So let me play with the dirt level. And it starts adding it kind of all over, which is exactly what I want, but maybe not quite as much as that. So I'll bring it to a value of 0.5. All right, that looks pretty cool. Let's play with the height value of this as well. So let's go up and click on the actual layer here for the dirt, not the mask. And let's scroll down, expand technical parameters, and we'll change the height position here from 0.5, which is neutral, basically no height up or down. We'll change that to 0.51, just for a little tiny extra detail. Catches the light a little bit better. Now I just want to make a quick note about the handle here. Let me zoom in real quick. So on the side of the handle, you can see that there's seams going down the middle. I think this is being generated by the curvature map. Even though we disabled seams for that, there's still a hint of them there. Now we could probably fix this, but these handles in real life actually do have a little seam there, so I'm going to leave it. And another quick note about the texture going through the seams. You can see that's not going through seamlessly, which again would make sense for this type of handle since it's two parts being pasted together and we have a seam in the middle. But just in case you want your textures to go through seamlessly, I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. So the texture we have here is from the edge wear on the handle. So let me go to the handle. I'll expand that and go down to, where is it? The rubber worn mask right there, and then click on the metal edge wear generator. Now there's an option here called use triplanar. Wherever you see these options, if you turn that on, then it's not going to make the textures based on the UVs. It'll make the textures in such a way that it'll go right through the UV seams. So you can see that's going through the middle of the handle seamlessly now. But I'm going to keep that turned off. But just keep that in mind. Wherever you see that option, that'll enable you to allow your textures to go through seams seamlessly. Now let me show you how to export the textures for this, and then I'll show you how to render it in Substance Painter. So let's go up to File, go down to Export Textures, and up here you set the folder you want to export to, as well as the format for the images. And here's our configuration. It's set to our project configuration, which is Unity 5. And let me expand this. So down here is the maps that are going to be exported. I'll explain them in a minute. And over here we have the document size. And like I mentioned before, you can actually increase that size and Substance Painter will recalculate your textures without any quality loss. So I'll leave that set to 2K though. Now let's go over to configuration and I'll go down to the one we chose, which was Unity 5 Standard Metallic. So by default, these are the maps that are exported under this configuration. We have our albedo and transparency. We have the metallic information in this image saved to the RGB channels and the smoothness information saved to the alpha channel. Then we have our normal map here, which also includes the height information. You're not going to get a separate height map out of this export. That's going to be combined with the normal map. And then an emission map if you have emission materials. Now let's say you wanted to include ambient occlusion as an exported map as well. To do that, let's create a new gray map. And then over in the mesh maps, left click and drag ambient occlusion over to the gray channel and then choose gray channel. And now let's rename this. Let's give it the same naming convention as the others. So I'll copy that text, paste it there, and just rename the suffix to AO. So now this configuration is going to export an ambient occlusion map as well. Now, if you don't want to export maps to Unity and you want to export maps for a more general PBR metal roughness workflow, then let's switch over to that configuration here. And you'll see we have our basic color map there, roughness, metallic, normal, height, emissive, all the things we can easily use in programs like Blender. So let's create the ambient occlusion map for this as well. So I'll click gray under create, drag ambient occlusion from mesh maps over onto there, choose gray channel. And again, we'll copy and paste that name over and switch the suffix to AO. So now we've changed that configuration as well to include exporting an ambient occlusion map. Now, if you're using this configuration, there's one thing to keep in mind, and that's the kind of normal map being used. Right now, you can see that normal map for DirectX is being used, but if you want to use this in Blender, we're going to have to change this to normal OpenGL. So what I'll do is just click on that, drag it onto the RGB channel of the normal map there, and then choose RGB channels. So now we'll be rendering out a normal map for OpenGL, so we'll be able to use that in Blender. Now we have to go back to our Export tab and choose whatever configuration you want to export, and then we will just click on Export. Now you can see it popped up with a warning, and you can see that in the log below here. It says map knife low, material emissive can't be generated. Well, that's because we don't have any emissive information, so you can just ignore that. And I'll click on Open Folder, and we'll check out the maps we've got. Now make a note that when you export textures, the height detail is combined into the normal map. So you don't actually have to export a height map unless you're using it for displacement. So I did a quick test render and I wasn't crazy about all the grunge and the dirt, so I simply turned that stuff down to achieve a cleaner look. And if you want to get the same results as me, I'm going to quickly show you the settings for each of my masks and textures. So let me go over to the layers and I'll click on the mask for the dirt layer and go down to the MG dirt generator. So these are the settings for that generator. If you want to copy these over, then you can pause the video now and copy them. And now let me go down to the blade folder. I'll expand that. We'll go down to black paint and go to let's click on the mask for that and click on the metal edge wear generator. And these are the settings for that. And now let me go to the regular black paint layer and I'll go down to the matte finish rough filter. And these are the settings that I changed for that. I think I just lowered the brushing intensity for this. And now let me go down to the handle. I'll expand that. We'll go down to the rubber worn mask and click on the metal edge wear generator. And these are the settings that I changed here. I think I might have just lowered the contrast. And so basically I just turned the dirt down and the metal edge wear and it gave me a cleaner look, and I think that looks a lot better in the renders. So that's what I'm going to stick with. So once you've got your textures dialed in, what we're going to do now is just make a nice render in Substance Painter. So let's go up to the top right here, click on the camera icon to activate the Iray renderer. So at the top right panel here, we have our render settings. You can set your number of samples or you can set your max time, and whichever maximum it reaches first, the rendering will stop. You can always pause the rendering at any point as well, and at any point you can save the render too. You don't actually have to let it finish all of the iterations. And down here you have the resolution settings. By default, the viewport size is the resolution, but you can override that by enabling that option and typing in your own resolution settings there. Now down here in the environment settings, you can switch your HDR environment if you want to, but I'm going to leave mine set to panorama. And if you scroll down, there's some other options down here, including turning on and off the ground. Right now, it's kind of hard to see with this, but it is casting a shadow. So I'm going to turn off the ground because I also want to turn off the background by enabling clear color. And I'll change this to a darker gray. And if you scroll down, you got some camera settings here, including field of view. The higher that is, the more perspective the scene will have. The lower it is, the more orthographic it will be. And we also got some post effects down here, so you can enable that and enable things like glare. And I'll add some shines to the brighter parts of your image, and you can play with those settings if you want. And it includes lots of different shapes as well. I'll set mine to bloom, and just gives me a nice little glow and some horizontal streaks like that. Alright, so now you can just rotate your scene, zoom in and out, find the perfect view, and also remember you can hold the shift key and right click and drag to change the environment rotation. So get the right lighting, get the right post effects, get the right settings, and let it render, then hit save render, and that's it. And that'll actually do it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for new videos every week. And also check out my new training course I've been working on. It's called Master Car Modeling in Blender, and I'll be taking you through the step-by-step process of modeling this Corvette Stingray. You'll learn all the secrets to hard surface modeling you'll need to create perfect curved surfaces. You can check out more about this in the link in the description. So until the next video, I'll see you around.